on 106.5 FM and online. It's the After 5 Guest with Wynne Thomas.
And time now for the After 5 guests on the programme, and my After 5 guests today are Richard Williams and Amanda Powell, and they're the authors of Coal and the Community in Wales. Hi guys, you okay? Yeah, can you hear me all right? How did the book come about, Amanda?
Well, it's really Richard's story because it's essentially a photography book, and it's Richard's photographs before, during and after the 1984-85 miners' strike. So I think it's best if Richard picks up on this.
Yep, okay, thank you.
I was a young freelance photographer, aged about 23 years of age when the strike started, covering the South Wales valleys. I used to do quite a lot of work for the local papers, and the strike began, and I covered it from start to finish, more or less. So I realised then, some 40 years on, that I had this rich sort of archive of images of people going through great hard times and, you know, all the problems. And I thought, well, with the 40th anniversary coming up, it's going to be a bit of a waste if some of those images are never seen. So Amanda and I put together the book and an exhibition. So that's how it all came about.
Yeah.
So there's several things we've done, really. As Richard said, there's one exhibition that's going on up at the Rhondda Heritage Park at the moment, just north of Pontypridd, and that's there till the end of May. And we've just been down in Llandilo today, setting up some photographs there as well in a place called Hen Gut. And we're going to be at the Literary Festival in Llandilo on the 28th, so week Sunday, in conversation with the poet and author Owen Shears.
Oh.
So, you know, talking about the book, and most of all talking about the incredible stories of the people that we've tracked down in Richard's photographs. So as a writer, you know, when he dug out these dusty negatives of pictures that he'd taken 40 years plus ago, I was absolutely intrigued by what had happened to those people. You know, what were the stories? What did they go through, especially during the strike, and how their lives had panned out afterwards? So, you know, that was all part of the process of writing the book and weaving these stories around Richard's amazing photographs.
Yeah, I mean, the introduction is the start of a year-long 1984-1985 miners' strike, one of the most significant industrial actions in the UK and history. The book actually covers that sort of period, doesn't it? Those open wounds, are they still there today in the mining community?
Sorry, we missed a bit.
The last part
of your question there.
I said, are there still open wounds today after this? All these 2 years later.
So. One of the things I think Amanda and I first realised, that going back to interview the people nearly 40 years later, they still felt as strongly today as they did at the time. And every one of them, without fail, said if the same set of circumstances arose tomorrow, they'd do it again.
Right.
Which is amazing when you consider the hardship they went through. But it was so humbling to be invited into people's homes, and I think a lot of them wanted to tell their story. And Amanda got some amazing lines for the book out to these people, and some current up-to-date photographs of them to accompany them. The company photographs I'd shot 40 years earlier.
But the book
it's really, you know, it's such. I think for anybody who lives in one of these former industrial areas, that, you know, as your listeners, I'm sure, will appreciate with the history of the steel and tinplate works around them. The wounds are very much there, and the scars on the landscape are still there. And the book's very much a story of struggle and sacrifice and solidarity that resonates with everybody in Wales.
Yeah. And women came to the forefront of the movement, didn't they? For the first time, would you say?
Well, for many women, yes, that was absolutely the case. So one of the chapters in the book is about the time when Margaret Thatcher came to the Welsh Conservative Party conference in Porthcawl, and it was during the strike. It was June, and that chapter has got some particularly striking images. Actually, again, some of your listeners might recognise themselves or other people in those photographs, because women from the miners' support groups and the different support groups around South Wales, they travel for miles to be there, turned out to protest. And these support groups were absolutely vital to people being able to carry on during that strike. It went on for a whole year, so that miners obviously weren't bringing their pay packets home. And if the women hadn't been there raising funds, running the soup kitchens, putting food parcels together, they wouldn't have been able to keep going. And also, the women we spoke to talk really movingly about how their experiences during the strike changed the course of the rest of their lives, and some of them actually, went on to become involved in politics, and in actually quite senior positions in politics afterwards, which wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for what they did at that time.
But your book doesn't take sides, does it? It sort of stays neutral in the middle and just shows what actually happened. That's the good thing about the book, is that it doesn't take sides one way or the other, does it? Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I think that's very true, actually. I think from the point of view of a press photographer, for me, as a local photographer, not somebody shipped in from London for the day to cover for the national papers. I was born and brought up in these areas. It was important to me to reflect what actually happened in front of me, not try to manufacture something that didn't really exist. So it's a totally impartial view. There are positives and negatives on both sides. The decisions were made badly on both sides, but we tried in the book especially never to sort of pick a side or accuse anybody of anything other than covering the exact thing as it happened, which was always my intention.
Yeah,
although, having said that,
yeah.
I'm the daughter of a miner, the sister of a former miner. My grandfathers were miners as well. So I didn't consciously seek out to be impartial, and it was a very emotional journey. Actually, it brought back a lot of feelings and new feelings about my own thoughts on the mining industry. I mean, I hadn't, although I knew how dangerous mining was. I think we all know many of the facts about it. Talking to people who were involved very much brought that home to me, and it brought back thoughts of my own late father, who'd his pelvis had been broken in a mining accident when he was a teenager as an apprentice. So I think it's actually, given my own background especially, it was very, very difficult to write a book like this without having a certain perspective of it, and I think that probably does come through as well.
Yeah. There's a figure in my head here of having £10 to £15 a week to live on. Is that a figure that you've seen as well, or is that something that I've seen from somewhere else?
So that comes from one of the interviewees in the book, a woman called Kath Morgan. Oh, she was absolutely incredible. I mean, she's not very well, like a lot of the people we spoke to. I mean, we're all hardly in the first flush of youth anymore, and these are people who very often had difficult lives, and the strike made it more difficult. And she was actually in tears when she spoke to me. I went to see her in the nursing home that she'd moved to from my stig at the top of the Llinvi Valley, and we see photographs of her at the time. She was an ordinary miner's wife. She became involved in the local miners' support group for the Llinvi and Avon valleys, and she was a key personality. And the photograph we see of her, or a couple of photographs actually, is her standing during a big gala and sports day at the old parish rugby ground in my stig, making a very impassioned speech. And she'd had to be persuaded to make that speech because she was quite nervous. And she was there with local politicians, the miners' leaders. There was an MP known as the Beast of Bolsover, which again some of your listeners will remember.
I remember.
Dennis Skinner.
Yeah, I do.
So and she's the person who said to me, it was really hard, if we probably only had 10 to 15 pounds a week to live on. She had 2 sons, and she really does talk very emotionally about the hardships. Again, hardships that anybody who knows anything about this strike will identify with. And I think even if people don't know much about the strike, our aim with the book, which is called Coal and Community in Wales, was very much to tell that story and maybe bring it to new generations, bring it to people who maybe don't know very much about the mining industry, so that, it gives them that perspective and they know what their heritage was.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of good photos in here. I mean, there's the Talbot Steelworks, the picket line and the police presence, and also as well, the miners going back to work from Betos caused a stir as well, didn't they, Richard?
So you're talking about Monty Morgan there, I
think? Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Well, that was quite a day. He was the first miner in South Wales to break the strike. Went back into work on 2 days, and the second day it took hundreds of police to hold back hundreds of pickets, which took all day for the police and pickets to build up enough numbers. The police were trying to get enough police there to secure a safe passage out to the colliery. And I think the miners' attitude was, well, if you've gone into work, you can stay in work, because they were trying to block the bus leaving the colliery.
Right.
And that was quite a tense day with a lot of friction between the police and the pickets that day as the bus eventually came through.
And we were both there that day. So at the time, Richard had been freelancing as a photographer for a while. I'd not that long before started as a trainee reporter on the local newspaper. And we, I was a bit wet behind the ears, if I'm honest. We both went up there, up to Blaengarw. And nobody did risk assessments in those days. So Richard was there with his camera, I was there with my notebook, my shorthand notebook, and we were standing there actually between the miners and the protesters and the police, and I'll never forget it, there were missiles flying over our heads, and it was so emotional and very, very tense. And actually, not long after that, I interviewed Monty Morgan and his wife Sheila, and I can remember, throughout the rest of my life, I've always wondered what on earth was going through his mind. Why did he do this? Anybody who has an understanding of Valley's communities, and especially during the strike, will know how solid they were, the solidarity that the South Wales miners and their families had was absolutely incredible. So what motivated him? He was an outsider. He had moved to the village of Betos, not far from Blaengarw, to work in the mines. So I'm not sure he quite understood the culture, but even so, the NUM men had tried to persuade him not to go. Not to go to work again after the second time. The pictures in the book are very, very vivid, showing the anger, this absolute fury that people felt against him. And yet there was a kind of stubbornness about him that made him go back to work again. And when I interviewed him afterwards, I can remember him saying, well, I said to him, well, they're calling you a scab, what's that like? That must be awful. How do you take that? And he said, well, scabs heal, don't they? They heal over. And it was abundantly clear that he thought that, it would kind of be forgive and forget, but that didn't happen. And in the end, he had to move away and move to Cheltenham. So, not long after that, he left the pit.
Just finally on this interview, in the book as well, you mentioned that 1,700 returned to work during the strike. That's a bit of an unknown fact, would you say? I haven't come across that before. Am I right in saying that?
Sorry, I didn't catch you there. Can you say that again?
I'm saying in the book, it actually says that 1,700 returned to work during the strike. It's a little-known fact, that, I believe.
Well, that was towards the end. You have to bear in mind, they'd gone through a whole year, and it became... it became more evident as you know, summer turned to autumn and autumn turned to winter, that this was a hopeless cause, that the Thatcher government and the NCB had planned for this so effectively that the miners were very much up against it, and the chances of them succeeding were slim. So the Thatcher government had stockpiled coal, for instance. So I think we're looking at people who were in absolute desperation by then. They had mortgages to pay, they had food to put on the table. So that trickle back to work did happen. But again, bear in mind, South Wales was the most solid area in the whole of Britain in that sense. You know, and they went back to work defeated. But I wouldn't say that they were undeterred in their sense of solidarity, in their sense of camaraderie. That shines through, and that really shines through in the people that we spoke to for the book, and in the way that we've reflected their stories. I really hope what we aim to do was do justice to those stories.
Well, it's a fascinating book. Some absolutely fantastic photographs in there, Richard, and also some great writing as well, Amanda. Thanks so much for being my After Five guest today. That's where we must leave it. But as I say, there's lots of more questions I could ask you, but I haven't got the time. But thanks so much indeed for being my After Five guest today.
Thank you very much.
And the book is Coal in the Community in Wales by Amanda Powell and Richard Williams. Thanks so much indeed, guys. Marvellous.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.